And welcome back to Wellingborough, where we are spending the morning at the Ugly Mug Cafe in Church Street in the middle of the town. And, well, this is a constituency that in 2 weeks' time, 2 weeks today, goes to the polls. And all eyes, really, are on this constituency because, of course, we are in a general election year. Now, if you live in a different part of the county and you're wondering what this covers, so the constituency covers, well, the towns of Wellingborough, Rushden, High and Ferrers, but it also takes in a fair few rural places. So we've got villages like Irchester, Findon, Isham and Beaujett. And we are spending the morning here with 6 of the candidates, of the 11 candidates who are taking part. So we have got with us Anna Savage-Gunn for the Liberal Democrats, Ben Habib for Reform UK, Helen Harrison for the Conservatives, Jen Kitchen for Labour, Will Morris for the Greens and Marion Turner-Hawes, an independent. So to kick off and to prove that they're here in person, what we'll do first off is to, well, get them to introduce themselves, their party and an interesting fact about themselves, and we'll do this in alphabetical order. So first up is Anna Savage-Gunn.
Hi, I'm Anna Savage-Gunn, standing for the Liberal Democrats. I protected the Queen Mother, Her Royal Highness Queen Elizabeth Queen Mother. And talking of Queen Mothers, I also worked in my mum's care home during COVID just so I could get to see her.
OK, I should also say we have 30 seconds for this because there are time constraints. So Anna did actually stick to that without being told. She waves her hands in the air. So next up, Ben Habib.
My name is Ben Habib. I'm the candidate for Reform UK. An interesting fact about myself is, well, I love boxing. I used to box for my university. Perhaps people don't know that. But it's as interesting as it gets.
OK, well, people will work from that what they will. Next up for the Conservatives, Helen Harrison.
Hi, so I'm Helen Harrison, the Conservative candidate for this election. And an interesting fact about me, I think my private life has been pretty much plastered all over the news for the last few years, so there's probably not much I can tell you. But I am a founding member of a national campaign, Grassroots Out, which was born and bred here in Wellingborough, which was a Leave campaign. So that's an interesting fact about me.
And Jen Kitchen.
Hi, I'm Jen Kitchen. I'm representing Labour. An interesting fact about me was I represented the county at gymnastics and actually national and international. But I was in talks to do the Olympic team, but I broke my back. So hopefully this will be less painful.
Well, we shall find out, won't we? And then Will Morris.
Last but not least, I'm Will Morris. I represent the Green Party. Fun fact, I used to be a stand-up comedian, and in fact I used to run a comedy club at the Horseshoe on Sheep Street in Wellingborough.
OK, gosh, comedians, boxers, gymnasts. Last up then, Marion Turner-Hawes.
Hi, I'm Marion Turner-Hawes. I'm an independent candidate standing in the election and I'm on the town council. Interesting facts, I'm a qualified football coach, massage therapist and energy assessor. And I received a national award a few years ago for helping clear the alleyways around Victoria Ward and Isbrook Ward, which led to the Safer Streets project starting in the area. So, busy person.
A busy person, right. OK, and if you want to see a list of all 11 candidates, then go to the BBC website, the BBC News website, and you can do that this morning. So let's get into the debate then. Let's start with a subject that affects everyone, the economy and the cost of living. So here's how one man feels.
I've got a son who's a nurse and he has to work 60 hours a week to make ends meet. And I don't think that's very good because no one should have to work that many hours. And he should be paid a decent wage for what he does.
OK, so that's one person's thoughts, and I'm sure a lot of people will agree with that. So let's start with you, Helen Harrison, for the Conservatives. How can you help an average person in, I don't know, Isham or Beaujett make their money go further?
As you know, the government has put a lot of money into helping people through the cost of living crisis. So there are the cost of living payments that have helped many thousands of people here in Wellingborough and Rushden, those who are the least well off and in most need. As an executive member of Adults Health and Wellbeing on Northampton Council, I've also been responsible for the distribution of the Household Support Fund, which has again helped lots and lots of people, many thousands of people across the constituency with free school meals for children during the school holidays, getting money to people when things like their fridges break down, helping those most in need, so people with caring responsibilities, those with disabilities. So I'm really proud of the work that I've done to help distribute that money to the people most in need here in this constituency and across Northamptonshire. Then, of course, let's not forget there was the help with fuel payments. And finally, I think, and this is really welcome because I absolutely agree that people should always be paid a fair amount for the work that they do. And I think that the huge increase in the national living wage is absolutely welcome and will make a massive difference to the lives of people here in Wellingborough and Rushden.
OK, Jen Kitchen for Labour.
Well, to be honest, I got into politics because when I was 22, I looked around in my local council at the time and I didn't see anybody that was on a grad scheme or minimum wage like me. I didn't see anyone in insecure rental tenancies like I was. Everyone was sort of, 40 to 50 plus with a house that they'd bought in the 80s, it seemed. So I can completely get where this guy is coming from. I mean, actually, as a Labour Party nationally, we've got some incredible plans about the Green Prosperity Plan, which is to make people's homes more insulated, so we're taking bills down. Our energy plans are about, again, making sure that we're energy secure so that you're not fluctuating as much during the winter time. But also, as Helen said, I'm a great believer in making work pay, and we've had an economy that's stagnated and wages have stagnated for about 10 years now. And if you're when my first job, I was on the same starting salary as my dad was 32 years earlier. And that's just kind of symptomatic of the economy not growing and people not being paid more, but it's also symptomatic of not having work and not making it pay.
Ben Habib, what would Reform UK do for people like the man that we heard from?
So it's interesting. He encapsulates in this one comment by him actually a great deal of what the United Kingdom is facing. We've had 2 waves of inflation in this country. We talk about the wave of inflation that's happened in the last couple of years, but actually before that, when the banks collapsed in 2008, 2009, we printed money like Billio to save the banks. And that devalued the pound in people's back pockets. So it took the working and middle classes out of the ability to afford houses, which was put beyond their reach. So we had asset price inflation originally, which has damaged people's ability to aspire, to use their savings for any meaningful purpose. That seems to have been lost in most debates. Then, of course, we have what happened when we unlocked, which was a spike in consumer price inflation. And that's the most obvious one because people now are suffering not only the inability to buy houses that they need to buy, but also simply to buy the food and heat their homes in the way that they need to do it.
So that's what's wrong, according to you, but what would you do?
That's what's wrong. So what we have to do, Jen is absolutely right, what we have to do is grow the economy. But you do not grow the economy by taxing people to hell and preventing wages from rising. What we've got to do is cut taxes on the working and middle classes. Our signature policy for Reform UK is to increase the threshold at which income tax is levied from £12,500 per annum to £20,000 per annum. That would take 6 million people out of the tax net. People are highly overtaxed. And the other really critical thing that we've got to do is pare back on this inexorable drive to net zero by 2050, which is burdening people's pockets incredibly. You do not save the environment by bankrupting the economy. And then lastly, what we've got to do is cut back on legal immigration, which is undercut.
We'll come on to that.
Yeah, we will, but it's important for the cost of living crisis. Cheap imported labour has made it impossible for the domestic labour market to increase its wages. So it's a combination of inability to increase wages, over-taxation and over-costly regulations.
OK, you've managed to get a lot in there in that one answer. So let's go to someone else. Anna Savage-Gunn for the Liberal Democrats. Cost of living, how are you going to solve these problems for the average person on the street?
Well, first of all, you have to recognise them. And at the moment, I don't see that the government is recognising that any of the working people are having issues. They can't pay their mortgage. The rent's gone through the roof. heat, food prices. There's food inflation running at about 33%. And the first is to recognise the problem, and somehow it's not being recognised at government level. When you've got food banks that are visited by nurses, teachers and police officers, there is something fundamentally wrong with a government that's pushing people to that extent.
And Will Morris for the Green Party, you're nodding along there.
No, I agree absolutely. I think the elephant in the room here is the catastrophic mismanagement of the economy, which includes Brexit, and we'll no doubt come on to that later on, which includes the actions of the unelected Liz Truss in torpedoing the economy whatever a year ago. I think for us, if you look at the average man or woman in the constituency, what they're interested in is a fair deal for themselves, a fair deal for their neighbours and a fair deal for everybody.
Helen Harrison, your party's been attacked a fair bit there, so you better respond to some of those points, because you've been killing the economy, according to lots of people.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it, that everything that's happening in this country is blamed on Brexit, which I think is a really cheap point to make, because if you look at the world economy, inflation has affected the whole world. We've been hit by both COVID and then by wars both in Europe and now in the Middle East, and those are having massive impacts on people across the world. So to blame it on Brexit is incredibly lazy. And the fact is, if you look at how our economy compares to those of our European neighbours, we're doing better than some of our European neighbours, and we're, I think, the third fastest growing economy in the G7 at the moment. So, this idea that Brexit has done something terrible to our economy is absolute nonsense. The idea that we're ignoring the fact that people are struggling at the moment is absolute nonsense too. I just mentioned a lot of the help that the government has given to protect people and cushion people from the headwinds that I've just talked about. I mean, if anybody thinks for 1 second that the COVID pandemic was not going to have a massive impact on our economy, when necessarily we had to shut large parts of the economy down, spend billions and billions on a really generous furlough scheme, one of the most generous in the world, millions and billions on helping out businesses to keep them afloat during that time, and a huge amount of money on making sure that we got the first vaccination in the world. And by the way, that's partly because we'd left the EU and we were able to make those decisions to go it alone and get on and nimbly do something on our own. So I absolutely reject out of hand the criticisms that I've heard around the table.
And Marion Turner-Hawes, Independent, you had your hand up. You'd like to point out something on this.
It's important to remember that this by-election is about choosing the next MP for this community, and actually we can talk about national issues, but how do those economic challenges hit us on the ground? And listen to this gentleman about his son. You've got, he's working 60 hours a week. Some people are working 3 jobs just to survive. In this area, nearly 40% of people in this area are in the low-paid sector. We need a rebalancing of the kind of jobs in this community. We need better skilled, better paid jobs. And from my point of view, what I would be doing as our local MP is firstly pushing. We've got to tackle the climate emergency. We've got to stop burying our heads about it. We've got to transition to a more sustainable way of living and a fairer way of living. And absolutely, by doing this and doing practical things on the ground in Wellingborough, in Rushden, in the communities of this constituency, we can create transition, better paid jobs for people, better support for people. We've also got to recognise that we've got to properly pay people that are working in the community and the care sectors, the NHS, properly reward people for their contribution.
We'll come on to the NHS a little later. Just one more point then on this cost of living. Jen Kitchen for Labour, we're told there's very little room for tax cuts. So is there anything that Labour could actually do differently to what we have now?
Yeah, so actually going on from what Marion was saying, what we want to do is, in our Green Prosperity Plan, is bring 13,000 jobs to the East Midland region. That's about 1,000 jobs here in Wellingborough, to make sure that we are, re-insulating people's homes, putting solar panels on. When we do our big house building plans, that means that solar panels are going on as standard. All of those create jobs, and they create well-paying jobs, and we're hoping that local councils will do local procurement, so they're local jobs too. Both Marion, I'm sure, will talk about the climate emergency, and our Green Prosperity Plan not only addresses that, but it also creates jobs in the local area that are well paid, which kind of goes on to what Marion was saying as well. And I think, yes, there's little room for tax cuts, but there's a lot that we can do to invest in our future and grow the economy through investment in our infrastructure, our housing and our local areas.
OK, Jen, thank you very much. As you can appreciate, we've only got an hour and we've got a number of topics to get through. So we will try and get views from everyone, and we'll do another topic. We'll move on from cost of living. We'll head to immigration after this.
Get closer to your team with BBC Radio.
The same
Where we are hosting a debate with 6
every Wednesday, The Cobblers Show every Thursday, and Friday Night Sport.
Get closer to your team. Annabelle Amos social
at
media
breakfast.
and on BBC Sounds.
BBC Radio Northampton. So we're back here at the Ugly Mug in Wellingborough, where we are hosting a debate with 6 of the candidates in the by-election, which is happening 2 weeks today in this constituency. So we've covered cost of living as much as we can. Let's move on to another subject on which, you and all of your parties are sharply divided. Here's what one woman in Wellingborough had to say on immigration.
Some parties are very interested in limiting severely immigration, whereas I believe that immigration is healthy because it boosts the economy and brings vital skills to the country. So that's important to me.
So there we go. That's just one person's thoughts. First up, let's go to Reform UK, actually, because Ben Habib, your party has some interesting views on this. How good or bad has immigration been for Wellingborough?
Well, just to say straight up, Reform UK is not against immigration. What Reform UK is against is the rampant, unbridled immigration that this country has experienced over the last 25 years. More people have come to the United Kingdom in the last 25 years than in all of history before that. Last year, we had 1.3 million people come from abroad to the UK. We had about 500,000 leave, so we had net immigration of just under 800,000 people. That is a rate of change in our population which we simply can't sustain at a social level. But at an economic level, which is the principle of the question, the idea that immigration can be used to plaster over broken British labour markets by undercutting our domestic labour simply doesn't work. The idea that you can generate growth out of effectively dumbing down and allowing corporations not to be forced to automate, not to be forced to upskill their workforce, to depend on this cheap imported labour, practicing effectively third world economic policies in a first world country, is deeply damaging to the economic future of this country. And lastly, when you bring so many people into this country, what you get is a massive burden on infrastructure, on the NHS. We've talked about it briefly already. We're going to talk about it again. On housing, we've talked about that. We're going to talk about it again. I think potholes is a big issue. Of course, there's a burden on infrastructure, education, all of that. And the last thing I'd just say is, immigrants get old too. It's a Ponzi scheme to think that we can sustain our economy on rampant, unbridled, imported, cheap labour.
Anna Savage-Gunn for the Liberal Democrats. What would you do on immigration?
Well, for a start off, there needs to be some safe and legal routes which are monitored. And there needs to be a new visa agency set up to receive people that come into the country so they can be dealt with swiftly within 2 to 4 weeks. But at the moment, that's not happening. People are arriving and sometimes their visa applications take 2 years. And during that time, they can't work. So they are a burden to us because we have to house them. But to say that it's cheap labour for us, I don't know when you last went to an NHS hospital, but they are staffed mostly by people that are immigrants here. And I was proud to serve in my mum's care home with a woman from Nigeria during COVID, and she was more at risk than I was because of the nature of her ethnicity, and I was proud to serve with her. And it's those people that have saved our NHS. So if I welcome immigration for the jobs that we don't seem to be taking up. And I was honoured to serve with that woman.
Sure, but we have a broken labour market. We've got 6 million people surviving on universal credit to a greater or less extent. 2 million people not working. That's 20% of the UK's workforce is surviving on benefits. What we need to do is upskill our own population, educate our own population, put them into those jobs, not to import people to fill gaps which we can't fill domestically.
Okay.
It's lazy thinking.
Ben, you've had quite a lot to say on that, but I want to come to Conservative on this, Helen Harrison. So, because obviously a lot of your literature deals with immigration as one of the key issues.
Yeah, thanks, Annabelle. And the key reason for that is because for years I've been a local campaigner. I've been out knocking on the doors of people in Wellingborough, Rushden and the villages. So, I have a pretty good idea of what people are concerned about. And the top issue when I knock on doors is the illegal boat crossings. But they're also worried about legal migrations and the levels of that. Broadly, I agree with the sentiments that Ben has expressed just now. I will push back a little bit on his figures for last year on immigration, because that did include, of course, the very generous resettlement scheme. So we had the Ukraine resettlement scheme, we had the Afghan resettlement scheme, and we've got the Hong Kong scheme. Now, that has brought many thousands of people into this country because we welcomed them and we asked them to come, and that has inflated those figures for that year. But I do agree that we are putting an unsustainable pressure on this country's infrastructure by just relying on overseas people to come and fill the gaps in our labour market. Now,
but all of that has happened under the Conservatives.
It has, and I think we've been too slow in addressing it. I will say that straight up. I absolutely believe we've been too slow in addressing it. I'm really pleased to see that the government is now addressing that. In terms of the small boat crossings, the Albanian returns agreement has reduced Albanian crossings by 95%. I'm absolutely 100% convinced that once the Rwanda scheme is up and running, that will pretty much stop those illegal crossings in their tracks. And that includes, by the way, people coming over illegally in the backs of trucks and other illegal routes into this country. But we also need to push back on the legal migration routes, because they are being exploited. And I knew somebody would mention the NHS. We have an NHS workforce plan. I actually believe it is somewhat immoral that we, as a first world country, exploit the natural resources. So those people who've been trained in healthcare in other people's countries, that is an expensive thing for those countries to invest in. And then we go along, we plunder that, and we bring them over here to work in our NHS. We should be training people here in this country, and we have a workforce plan to do that.
Jen Kitchen for Labour, you were shaking your head to a lot of that, especially when Helen Harrison mentioned Rwanda. What would Labour do?
Thank you very much for coming to me. And I'm really interested in the way that the lady has framed it in the Vox Pop, because yes, some immigration has been really good at boosting the economy, and we were speaking to Weavers School, who are saying that they have to employ teachers for overseas because currently our current teaching stock either won't come to the school or they don't have the money to kind of pay for the salaries that they're expecting. But when Helen and Ben were talking about kind of current immigration and what we're doing, I hear a lot of hot air. I don't hear a lot of actually concrete plans, so let me lay out our concrete plans. We're going to be recruiting over 1,000 Home Office workers to make sure we take down the backlog, and that means that people are getting their national insurance numbers quicker so they can get back into work. We'll also be employing 1,000 extra resettlement officers, and that means that people that here are illegally, means that we can deport them if we need to. We're also going to be joining Europol, which we aren't a part of at the moment. In fact, I was speaking to a border force officer in Hyam Ferris. He was very disparaging about both of your plans, but he was saying how when someone comes through the gate at Luton or Gatwick or Heathrow, we don't actually know if there's a current warrant out for them on the European continent, and that's because we've left and we haven't replaced it with anything. We left the EU and we haven't replaced it with another policing agency. So those are three things that we're going to be doing at home and abroad. We'll be working closely with France to make sure that people that can apply for legal routes will be doing so before they come. We'll be working to crack down on criminal gangs, partly because they can't come into the country in the first place because we know that there's a warrant out for them, but also partly to make sure that actually it doesn't pay for smuggling gangs to bring people over. And also we'll be working and supporting institutes like our RNLI.
OK, so that's Jen Kitchen for Labour. Will Morris for the Green Party?
Yeah, I guess I would ask people, when did we become such a horrible country? When did we become such horrible people? Look, this is straight out of the playbook of the 1930s. We're diverting attention onto immigration from the real issues that underlie society. We're conflating illegal and legal immigration. We're conflating resourcing issues. We're conflating the economy. This is almost entirely self-inflicted. I would suspect everybody in this room today has at least partly immigrant blood or blood from overseas in them. We are all part of the melting pot of Great Britain, and we should be proud of that, and we should be proud to welcome people to our shores. We came out of the Dublin regulations, so that's a self-inflicted wound. The French have asked for years to have a processing centre in Calais. What we've done is we've tried to create a hostile environment for soundbite politics instead of dealing with the real issues and dealing with the criminal gangs. And it's as simple as that. We've decided to become, the sick men and women of Europe.
Jen Kitchen, I'm just going to come back to you because obviously we are in Wellingborough. Wellingborough voted pretty heavily for Brexit. I think 64% voted leave compared to 52% nationally. So given that a lot of people voted Brexit in part over immigration concerns, have their concerns been addressed by what you have to offer?
Well, I think what the Labour Party is offering is not £8 million a day spent on asylum seekers in hotels. It's not $250 million for one private jet for very few people going to Rwanda. It is a clear plan that's actually backed by Border Force officers that are working on the ground already. I think if people want a clear and coherent plan, then Labour is the way to go. But if people want a party that's, fighting in the sack and half of them don't even support the Rwanda plan anyway.
And that's an issue for you, Helen Harrison, isn't it? As a Conservative party, there is a lot of infighting, especially over this issue, especially over Rwanda.
I think that just goes to show what an important issue this is. It's really important to hear everybody's points of view, but ultimately we have to have a concrete plan to resolve the problem. Now, the things that Jen has outlined, they are basically aimed at managing the flow once it arrives here in the UK, pretty much all of those issues that she raised. We're already doing all of those things anyway, and the idea that we're not already working with our partners in Europe to tackle the criminal gangs is nonsense. We're already doing that too. So there's nothing actually new in what Jen is proposing, and nothing there actually addresses the flow of people into this country. And I just ask Will, because none of us in this room have actually said anything that's anti-immigrant. We've just talked about the level of immigration. I'd like to know from you whether you think that there's actually a level at which it's unsustainable for people to be coming into this country, because the latest predictions are that in 2 years' time our population will have risen to £70 million. I'd just like to know if you think there's an upper level on what this country can cope with.
Will Morris?
Yeah, sure. I mean, is there an upper level? I think there isn't an upper level. I think what we've done is just let the record show Helen's waving her hands.
Uncontrolled immigration.
No, it's not uncontrolled immigration.
Turning your back on British citizens.
Can I speak,
can I bring
please?
this back to the situation?
Sorry, guys,
Hang on. Will Morris is speaking for the Green Party.
So I was asked a question. What we have done, again, is a huge self-inflicted wound by coming out of Europe. We had immigration under control in Europe.
OK. I mean, we're not going to go all the way back over the Brexit argument, because we'd be here all day, wouldn't we? And we are where we are.
But if I could just say, entirely clear, if I could just say one more thing. Back to the same point, we are demonising immigration as an attempt to camouflage the failing policy of the major parties. It's as simple as that.
OK, we're going to have to move on because...
Can I actually speak on this point? Because this is about what's relevant for the people of this constituency.
Marion, everything you could argue is relevant for the people of this constituency.
We're all standing to be MP here.
Absolutely.
It's only fair that we all get our say to do that. And that's one of the challenges for the people in this constituency. We are not getting our say. We are not being heard. Most people, this constituency works really well with a mixture. It's one of the most ethnically mixed communities in this county. Mm-hmm. People work well together. We absolutely, this nation has always had immigration and will always have immigration. What we haven't got is a very good assessment system. It's in appalling state. We need to work with people from across our communities.
You have made your point. We now need to move
I'd like
on
to
to
make it clear.
I'm sure you would, but we've invited you along to the debate. You're here.
I'm
You're
not here
having
to
your
make
say.
up the numbers. I am here to stand to be our MP and to do this job well.
Yes, well, we've understood that now, haven't we? Let's move on to another topic because we only have an hour. And this is a topic that is, mentioned a lot if you speak to people on the streets of Wellingborough, if you speak to people on the streets of any constituency in this country. The NHS has missed all of its waiting time targets for years. It is affecting the lives of lots of voters. Here's one woman's experience.
We haven't been able to get appointments and we are having to wait a long time for certain appointments for mental health, physical appointments, scans and basically face-to-face appointments. It's taken me about 3 years almost trying to push for a certain person to get help and we're still not there yet.
So there we go, one person's thoughts, and this will be echoed a lot around the country. Jen Kitchen for Labour.
Yeah, as you'll know, and most people have seen, we've been out door knocking. We've been speaking to over 12,000 people. And it's one of the things that comes up time and time again on people's doorsteps, that they can't get an NHS appointment for a doctor. They don't have urgent care. We know that the Rushden ambulance service was closed, I think, in 2016. And it was really central to my pledges to make sure that people realised that we were listening. As Marion said, we do need to listen to the voters, and we need to stop the 8 a.m. scramble. So one of the things that I've been doing, I've kind of already been acting as an MP. I've brought Wes Streeting, I've brought Rachel Reeves here. Central to those conversations have been about fighting for an urgent care centre in Isbrook. When we had Wes Streeting, we brought some of the worst affected patients that we'd heard on the doorsteps to come and meet him, to question him over Labour's plans, but also he very kindly took up some of the casework because we don't have an MP currently. Yes, I completely agree that it's absolutely outrageous. When we were speaking to the Off the Streets Knife Crime campaign, James was saying how you have 5 minutes to bleed out if you've got a stab wound, and actually there is no way that you can get an ambulance within that 5 minutes. 8 minutes. For most people, they're quoted 25 minutes if it's a category 1, which is the most urgent. But if it's not the most urgent, well, I've met a man in Rushden who broke his leg putting up Christmas decorations, and he was told to wait 8 hours. And then when he got to the A&E surgery, it was actually 6 hours wait in the waiting room. So it's absolutely a problem.
So you'd put more money in?
Yes, we're going to remove the non-dom status to increase the GP appointments in primary care by an extra 2 million and a 700,000 in NHS dentists as well.
Anna Savage-Gunn for the Liberal Democrats.
This is one of the cornerstones policies of the Democrats, is care and also NHS. And we commit to getting a doctor's appointment within 24 hours if it's urgent, and 7 days. So you'll be able to get your doctor's appointment. Also overhaul the dentists. I was at the dentist a week ago, and on the chair was an appeal from the dentist for me to contact my MP because they are underfunded. And it isn't worth a dentist being an NHS dentist, and that's why there's a dental desert in this constituency. And we will also recruit, retain and train doctors and nurses so we can try and keep them in the NHS. And also investing in care means that you can get people out of hospital. So it's almost like you've got a car. If you stick a potato at the exhaust, the car's not going to run. So you need to exhaust people from the hospital into care settings or into care into the community and give them care packages. If that's not happening, they back up the hospitals, which backs right up to the A&E, which then backs the ambulances way out the door, and then consequently you have these waits of Lord knows how long to get an ambulance. And there's been structural underfunding of the NHS by the government for years, of all services: NHS, education, police.
Helen Harrison for the Conservatives. We actually spoke to people a little earlier on this programme who were saying, you know, if you're in Wellingborough, you need to go to an A&E. You have to, for starters, choose whether you go to Kettering or you go to Northampton. Then we've heard people who can't get an appointment at their GP. We've talked about dentists. What will you do?
So quite clearly, the NHS is under a huge amount of pressure and strain. I worked in the NHS for almost a decade at the beginning of my career as a chartered physiotherapist. I know that back then, during Tony Blair's years, the NHS was always under pressure and always needing more money. And always struggling with waiting lists and waiting times. Now, in the last few years, I don't think you can possibly ignore the fact that we have been through a COVID pandemic. And I know that people are absolutely bored with hearing about that, but it had a massive, massive impact on the NHS. Not only were we asked to protect the NHS, which meant that a lot of people took that absolutely literally and did not go and seek help. So we have people who are having late diagnoses and delayed treatments, and that is having a huge impact on the NHS. Now,
waiting times were bad pre-COVID, though, weren't they?
So let's just look at a bit of a comparison here, because Sir Keir Starmer says that Wales is his blueprint for how to run the NHS. 1/4 of all people in Wales are on a waiting list. So in comparison to the England waiting list, that is far worse. Here in Northamptonshire, our waiting lists are coming down. The longest waiting lists of 18 months and more, I believe, have been eliminated now. And the people working in our NHS are working extremely hard to make that happen. So I think it's a bit, it's disingenuous to ignore the fact that the NHS has been through the worst crisis of our history that any of us can remember. And I'd just like to point out that in real terms, we are spending more on the NHS than we ever have before. And before anybody brings up Brexit and the £350 million per week on the side of that bus, which was vote leave, not grassroots out, just for clarity, I can confirm to you that we spend now, compared to 2016, over £400 million per week more on the NHS than we did back then. So actually that pledge has been fulfilled, if it ever was a pledge.
Will Morris for the Green Party, have you got a magic wand to sort the NHS?
Number one, the NHS is one of the jewels in the crown of Great Britain. It's one of the greatest successes of the 20th century, and it is being stolen from us. We own this thing, and it is being stealthily stolen from us by privatisation. You remember during COVID, everybody on their doorsteps clapping, and then the moment comes where actually we have to reward, we have to treat the people who work in the NHS properly, and it's hands in pockets and nobody's interested. I think it takes some skill to annoy the nurses, the consultants, the junior doctors, the GPs, Absolutely. The whole medical environment. I mean, that's quite an impressive achievement. There is a direct correlation between waiting lists increasing, performance in the NHS and Tory government. It's as simple as that, and you can look at any data you want. And one practical example, give me 2 seconds, Brian. One practical example to that is I live in Bossier. 10 years ago, Bossier had its own GP surgery. That has been transferred to Wollaston. It's almost impossible to get an appointment in Wollaston. If you go to Wollaston, they tell you to go to Corby, which is the other side of the county. So we've gone from a village of, 3,000, 4,000 people having its own surgery. That service has frankly been taken from us with no consultation. That is a practical consequence of the way the NHS has been mismanaged.
Ben Habib for Reform UK, I think on your literature you say you want zero waiting lists, don't you? How are you going to achieve that?
Yeah, well, I mean, the NHS is yet another example of a public service that isn't working as a result of failed policies. It's not a lack of spending. Helen's absolutely right. I think last year, £190 billion, a record amount, was spent on the NHS. But we've got to remember, as far as the NHS is concerned, we have an ageing population. We have treatments now available to people which are much, much more expensive than they were when the NHS was first conceived of. So the burden on financing the NHS is massive, and we do need to have structural reform of what the NHS is, what it does, and how it delivers its treatment. But at the heart of the problems of the NHS are two things. One, an economy that isn't working. If you haven't got a healthy economy, you can't actually do what you wish to do for the creation of new surgeries, the implementation of an accident and emergency service at Isbrook. You can't do it because you haven't got the money to spend it. And then the other thing, and I'm sorry to come back to it, but it is an absolute fact, if you have many, many more people coming into the country, they are going to need treatment, and that is going to burden the NHS. So we've got to have an integrated discussion, a holistic discussion across all policy areas when we look at the NHS. It's not an isolated issue. It's a function of lots of other things that have gone wrong.
One of the things that we haven't perhaps touched on with the NHS is the strikes that have been happening. Jen Kitchen for Labour, how do you stop those?
Well, I mean, the public sector pay freeze has been going on for over 10 years now. It's been at less than inflation, particularly in the last year. So when we as Labour say that we're going to create those extra appointments, what we really mean is that we're retaining and retraining and bringing new doctors, nurses, healthcare assistants in. I think when we talk about the waiting list going down in Northampton, I'm not actually sure that's a true representative. We've had couples, and in fact one couple from High Ferris came to tell us that they've come off the Kettering waiting list for their elective surgery. They weren't told about it. They were still expecting their knee replacement, and actually that's the casework that Wes has come and brought up for us. I think as a Labour Party we're going to be proactive rather than reactive as we are now. We're going to be putting lots of funding into primary care and then social care as well, because that's where the cheapest kind of reorganisation can be made.
Marion Turner-Hawes, Independent, you've had your hand up for some time.
Yeah, so with the NHS, really, you know, when we say we haven't got enough money for this, you know, the national budget is £1.1 trillion a year. We can use a lot of these decisions about political choices. I've stood in a number of elections in the last decade, and for people sitting back in 2010, when we were thinking about the aspirations for our community, that we'd be sitting here 14 years later and our main aspiration is to make sure that people can get a doctor's appointment and could even get to see a dentist. Where on earth have we been for the last 14 years? These are practical decisions that we need to be making. The NHS works well when there's supportive systems that enable the prevention ill health. I used to lead a programme called the Supporting People programme, one of the most effective systems and money spent in our community ever, and it helped people to get the support they needed at the time they needed it in an affordable way. It prevented people going into social care and to health. We need more community-based services, and our last MP, our incumbent, promised for nearly 20 years that we would have an urgent care service in Wellingborough, and it still hasn't arrived, and he's been in government.
Okay.
So we need these services to arrive. We need community-based services. We need prevention, not just crisis.
We are going to have to move on now.
More affordable.
We're 45 minutes in, which just goes to show time flies. It really does fly when you're having fun. But we need to move on to another topic because, there are plenty, and we've touched on this already. But I feel it's an important one. It's certainly where we are when it comes to law and order. There is one subject that's dominated the news in this part of Northampton. That is knife crime, and here is what one mum had to say.
I also have two sons who are not safe walking through the town centre anymore. There's been a series of knife incidents, and I now drive them everywhere. Even after school, it's daylight, and people are getting attacked, unfortunately, which is a concern.
Okay, Anna Savage-Gunn, what are you going to do about knife crime? Because that is not okay, is it, for a mum to not let her teenage children out onto the street?
I was a police officer here in Wellingborough, and I was proud to step out of the station and walk the town centre beat. And I then went on to become a senior officer and a law enforcement consultant internationally. And I can say that we are underfunding the police here, and the expectations that we put on the police are just way too much. Now, in terms of crime in the town centre, you need visible presence in the town centre. When's the last time you saw a police officer walking the town centre beat? Used to have a town centre beat where you had 3 police officers just walking the town proactively, not reactively. And at the moment, the police service has become
But that was when there wasn't cybercrime and all these other things that they're putting pressure on. That is what the police
But are they investigating cybercrime anyway, to the degree that we need? So,
no.
Anna, carry on.
We need more police officers on the beat. In the town centres, more community policing, and that's where we need to put our investment. There's been underfunding of all of nurses, NHS, teachers, policing, and if we do that, then police officers will be there proactively to stop youths hanging out on streets corners, be able to stop search if there is knife crime, and prevent it before it occurs. There just needs to be a stronger presence.
Jane Kitchen for Labour.
Look, my heart goes out to that mum. It's a story and it's a comment that we're hearing a lot, whether you're in Queensway, whether you're in Rushden, or whether you're in Findon. I do want to take this opportunity, though, to really commend the work of the third sector in Northamptonshire. We're actually seeing knife crime dip a little bit. The Off the Streets Knife Crime campaign has been amazing. Cam at Compound, incredible. The Wellingborough Amateur Boxing Club, also really great. They're all playing a part. So I think when we're talking about knife crime, we're talking about, making sure that there's youth provision, and that is all in the third sector at the moment. It's making sure that we are listening to the young people about what they want and meeting them at their kind of level. But we're also working with schools to make sure that there's extracurricular activities. Because when I was talking to the head at Weavers, he was saying he can keep kids safe in schools, but he can't keep them safe on the way home. And how do you combat that? I mean, Anna and Marion were right. You do need to have a named Bobby or a PCSO, which again is one of Labour's national plans. We're hoping to recruit 13,000 extra police officers. But we've had Yvette Cooper in the constituency. We did a round table with Off the Streets where they showed us their amnesty boxes. They've had 3,000 knives through those amnesty boxes, which is an incredible amount. But we've also talked with key people within the constituency that are real leaders in that area too.
Helen Harrison for the Conservatives, would you put more police officers on the street?
Absolutely, I would. I completely agree with the points that are being made. I'm really delighted that we now have more police officers in Northamptonshire than we have at any point in Northamptonshire's history. 237 more police officers hopefully out on the beat catching criminals and deterring crime. I think we need much more visible policing. I would work with Stephen Mould, our Police and Crime Commissioner, to make those points and have already done so. I agree with Jen that the community groups are doing an absolutely amazing job. I'm delighted that we have the Pioneer Family Hub here in Wellingborough, because I think a lot of the work that we're going to be doing with families and young people to help to prevent some of these issues in the future is going to happen at that level. And I've been very proud to be involved in that as the councillor for that area. So I think there's a lot of work we need to do. We've got £6 million more for our police force here in Wellingborough and across Northamptonshire, and the Safer Streets funding is having a real impact. And I think smaller actions like the Public Space Protection Order for Rushden will have a really good and amazing impact, because sometimes it's that low-level antisocial behaviour that starts people on a road towards worse behaviour and then can ultimately lead people to getting into trouble with knife crime and drugs, alcohol, and I'm really keen to see how that PSPO works out in Rushden. I think we need to go further. I think we need more monitoring of our streets. So I find myself very much in agreement with Anna and Jen on these issues. But just to say, we are investing more in our police force and we do have more police officers than ever before. I'm
going to move on then, because we've done a bit on that, but I really do want to get on to a bit that's very local, and that is on town centres, because we've been hearing a lot about that through this morning. You know, someone said that the heart had been ripped out of Wellingborough. So the town centre is a big one for lots of people here in this constituency.
We need to get shops that are a bit more appealing to everyone, I suppose. You know, I'm walking the dog and I've just gone past about 4 barber shops within 3 minutes. I just feel like we probably need a bit more of something in the town that will interest people to actually visit, rather than go elsewhere, like to your Russian Lakes or to Milton Keynes, places like that, to be honest.
Ben Habib from Reform UK, I'm going to bring you in here because you're reasonably new to this area then. So what will you do for the town centres, not just Wellingborough, but Rushden and others?
Well, town centres across the United Kingdom have suffered, partly because of changing shopping habits, partly as a result of the emergence of the online shopping, out-of-town shopping, and they've been hollowed out right across the United Kingdom. And the issues that are facing the resuscitation of these town centres are really manifold. They start with business rates that are too high, which need to be cut so that retailers are not taxed in order to get going again. It's a function of constrained planning. which needs to be deregulated so that to the extent that it's viable, you can convert those shops and offices above them into other uses that people actually want and need. And then thirdly, I'm going to come back to net zero. Some of the costs associated now with the standards required to bring back into use these properties is vast because of the regulations around net zero. You can't, for example, have a first-class net zero office building in any location other than perhaps London, Manchester and a few others, because the rents required to justify the investment because of net zero don't justify it. So you've got to deregulate the planning system, you've got to cut business rates, and you've got to pare back the regulatory environment. You need to reimagine the town centre based on where we are at the moment.
Marion Turner-Hawes, Independent, you live here. You've got thoughts on this?
Yeah, our town centres, whether it's in Wellingborough or any of the village centres, you know, I mean, you come into Wellingborough and it just looks so run down. And I've lived in other communities across this area and just outside the county. You know, we're in a way, we need a magic wand for our communities, but we've got to, you know, we've got some really good, viable businesses in our communities. They're not getting the support they need. We need, one thing that would help is more police presence on the streets in our community. I mean, we held an event with the town council last year, and you know, the police are saying to us that they cannot police the town centres in the way that we expect as residents. So that's got to be vital for us. But equally, we have got to invest and bring in and make the town centres community centres with the amenities that we need. And I will be working. I mean, the thing is, it's not just I will be working. I have been working already to help to support activities in our communities, to support. This isn't just about let's have a shop or let's have a home. We need shops and homes. We need to give opportunities for local businesses to be properly supported, and they're not being supported in the way. I mean, we've got community services operating in the town centre. They've been charged market rents, and they're providing services to the community. So we need to tackle those challenges. And in terms of net zero...
Well, I'm not going to get onto that now because we've got 5 minutes left, Marion. I need to get other people to speak. Will Morris for the Greens.
Yeah, I would say the question is what sort of town centre do we want? I think there is an opportunity to green town centres, not in the sense of the political parties, but in the sense of the environment. I think there is the opportunity to think about housing, to think about different uses, but it's about a lot of different things. If you look at the people of Wellingborough, and the people of this constituency have shown with the Wellingborough Trees campaign that Marion was involved in, I was involved in to a lesser extent, that we care about how the town looks, we care about our environment, and we care about people, frankly, desecrating it. But you've got transport links, you've got the quality of the water, you've got what do we collectively want to do in our town centre and all this sort of stuff. I don't think those questions are answered. But going back to some of Ben's points, I mean, net zero, I'm afraid, is not a tax on low-income people. It's not a tax.
It absolutely is.
Let me
it's a regressive tax.
That's the second time you've interrupted me. You've had your say. May I have my say now? Is that okay? Thank you. It's not a tax on the. It's not a tax on the poor. It's not a tax on anybody. It is a necessity, and a fair necessity, to get from A to B. And I would just say, in terms of retail, one of the things we need to think about is the quality of taxation between those selling online, you know, those selling locally, and try and support people who are trying to set up small businesses to grow without taking a huge tax burden when people, the bigger internet players, are not paying the same rate.
Helen Harrison for the Conservatives. How can Wellingborough, Rushden find and attract the money that it will take to reinvent those centres?
So you've asked what we would do as an MP to improve the situation, and everybody round the table has highlighted the manifest issues that our town centres face, and it's not unique to Wellingborough and Rushden. So what I would do as the local MP is I would get the town council, the Northants Council, local business people and local residents together, and I would work really hard to get a comprehensive plan that encompasses all of the issues that have just been talked about around this table. A greener, more pleasant town centre, a town centre that has the community facilities that people want that you can't get in out-of-town shopping centres, the services that you can't get in out-of-town shopping centres. It should be within our grasp that we can work out what unique selling point can our town centre have and how can we get that investment in, and it's by bringing all of those people together. And that's what I would do as the MP for Wellingborough and Rushden.
And Jen Kitchen for Labour?
Look, we've had a lot of saying about how terrible our high streets is, so just let me have a little moment to shout out some of the great businesses that I've been visiting as I've been around. So I wanted to shout out Lestrella in Rushden, Happy Mondays, the coffee shop there that's award-winning. We've got Wine Chateau, which is the only importer of Moldovan wine in the country. We've got Irvin's Tea, which to keep me supplied with English breakfast, so I have the energy to go out and everywhere. And I want to say York Cottage Spa as well in Beaujeu. I'm very excited to spend my Valentine's evening there. But I've done this before when I was a London councillor. I was Deputy Cabinet Member for Community Wealth Building, and this is not just about relying on the council. This is about working with your Chamber of Commerce, your trading associations to apply for grants to make sure that boarded up shops look better. It's also making sure that the businesses that we have in Wellingborough are online, whether that's on Facebook or whether that's just simply on Google. But it's also about creating a Visit Wellingborough task force, because we've got high streets like Hyam Ferris and Rushden, which are beautiful. We also have beautiful buildings in Wellingborough too. And it's making sure that actually this is an attractive place for people to come and spend their money, so they're not just reliant on the local population.
And just one final point then on this from Anna Savage-Gunn for the Liberal Democrats,
Yes.
town centres.
I agree. It definitely needs a collaborative approach, and I think the MP for here will have to lead that. They need to speak to the council, get the Police Crime Commissioner involved, trading associations, try and negotiate lower business rates, so those small, tiny shops that you don't get over at Rushden Lakes can have a foothold here. The tea shop was brilliant. I was just in there yesterday. Those are those unique little shops, a little crystal shop in Rushden. They're beautiful shops. And to make the town centre more attractive and clean it up, because broken window syndrome does attract crime. If we clean up the town centre, then that will reduce crime. People become more proud of it, and we will have a better town centre. All of our town centres can be beautiful, and we need to invest in them. But someone's got to lead that, and it hasn't been led up till now.
Well, that is where we must leave it. That is an hour of debate from 6 of the 11 candidates who will be standing 2 weeks today, polling day, 77 polling stations in this constituency of Wellingborough. Just a reminder that you can see a list of all 11 candidates on the BBC News website. There are minute manifestos of all candidates where possible. There'll be a Your Questions Answered section on the BBC News website where all candidates will be able to give answers on specific topics. There is also a TV debate on Politics East on BBC One on Sunday the 11th of February. Just go to the BBC News website. You will see a whole section on all of, well, everything to do with this Wellingborough by-election. Thank you very much to Ben Habib, Jen Kitchen, Will Morris, Helen Harrison, Marion Tenor-Hawes and Anna Savage-Gunn. Never has Bernie Keith been more needed.
On the BBC Sounds app, on your smart speaker,
play BBC Radio Northampton,
and on your radio.
The sound of Northamptonshire is
BBC Radio Northampton.